Hello. Hey, Sam. Hey, Lois.
Hey, Rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi. Hi.
This is very topical for our class. I was just listening to MSNBC, which I don't understand what I was on, but they had a rabbi and an imam who are trying to work together, and they quoted Maimonides. The rabbi quoted Maimonides, who said, if, and the imam was happy because he said, "Oh, Maimonides lived in Egypt," so that was
Yeah.
cute. Anyway,
Yeah, I'm sure that wasn't accidental that he quoted Maimonides.
yeah.
So,
Well, he
do you
didn't
know who
actually.
they
The
are?
moderated, but anyway, go
Oh,
ahead.
the moderator did?
Yeah, yeah.
So who who were these guys? Do you know?
No, I could go back and look, but yeah. Actually, I'm recording. I put it on record when I came into class, so I'll be able to get it later. Okay.
Welcome a lot.
Years ago, there was this guy who I was friendly with, who his name was Elisha. He called himself Elisha. That's what he said his Hebrew name was. He was a real character, a real character, who lived on this line between sanity and insanity, often dipping into the insanity side of things, but just like sort of. So he sort of like lived on that line. But he would make contact with all sorts of interesting people. And oftentimes he would introduce me to them. So he somehow met this guy who I think he was from Des Plaines, who was an imam. He was Sufi, and he was an imam, but what made him extra interesting was that he was originally Jewish. He had converted to Islam. And so this guy, Elisha, thought that it would be a good connection to introduce me to this guy. And so we met and schmoozed, and we talked about doing some kind of shared program with Muslims and Jews. It was going to be around the Rambam. The idea would be that it would be around some text of the Rambam or something to do with the Rambam. But he eventually said he backed out of it. And he said that the reason was he was told by other people it wouldn't be safe for him to do the programming, that if he did programming with Jews, it could be he could be a target for people. And my understanding is that it takes a lot more courage for a imam to get involved in these kind of things than it does for a rabbi. There's not that much blowback if a rabbi is on some panel with an imam, but the other way around, apparently, it could be.
Yet, knowing that he was Jewish and yet he became a Muslim. That's interesting.
I know. The guy, that was sort of the excuse for the first meeting. Right. I know. And also Sufis are very interesting to Jewish mystics. There have been communication going back to the Rambam's son, Avram ben Rambam, who spent a good deal of time with Sufis. So there has always been some sense that there's some kind of room for conversation with Sufis in particular, because they're mystics as well as being monotheists. But anyways, yeah. There was only one other time that I ever met with an imam, and his name is Abdullah Antepli. I met with him a couple of years ago. I don't know what he does now as his day job. At the time, he was a chaplain at Chapel Hill. But he got connected with the Hartman Institute, because the Hartman Institute was looking to cultivate relationships with the imams so that they could encourage imams to moderate, the Muslim community. So if they could get more imams talking about that it's okay to interact with Jews and to see fellowship with Jews, so then they could have a moderating influence. And I think he was like their main guy. They had like 10 or 12 imams that they were part of this program, that which I'm assuming meant they were getting a stipend from the Hartman Institute. But they really have to be, it's a heroic thing for them to do that, because you can just imagine that there'd be very strong opinions. Okay, so we're talking about the appointing of a king, and whether or not it's a mitzvah to appoint a king, or it's something that you can do if you want to do it. So the two positions would be, in other words, why does the Torah speak of it? If it's only something you can do, then why is this, and it's not a mitzvah, then why is the Torah speaking of it? So the reason, so according to many of these commentaries, they would say the reason the Torah is speaking about it is because if you do it, they want it to be a Jewish man. They don't want you to appoint a non-Jewish man, and also they don't want him to have the Torah doesn't want him to have lots of horses, and the Torah doesn't want him to have great wealth and certain other things. But that's only once you do it. So if you do it, then there are all sorts of things that kick in that the Torah has interest in, but doing it or not, that's up to you. So that's, again, several commentaries hold like that. The Rambam is identified as being the one who, one of the main people who says that it is in fact a mitzvah to appoint a king. We saw that the Abarbanel was very against it and felt like it was not a good form of government to appoint a king. And he suggests even the Rambam doesn't really mean it's a mitzvah to appoint a king, but rather he means something on the order of that other opinion, which is once you appoint a king, it should be such and such. But many other commentators on the Rambam just don't buy it. They don't think that that's the case with the Rambam. We saw when we were learning the Rambam that he says it is a mitzvah, and so that's why again yesterday and every day I bring up that translation of Rabbi Francis Nataf, which is the translation we read, where he wrote may in the Rambam's codes. He translated as may, and it seems to not have been a correct choice, because the Rambam is seems to be one of those people that almost everybody agrees, except for maybe the Abarbanel, that the Rambam holds that it is a mitzvah. Now, what the question we had is, if it was a mitzvah, why did they wait so long? So you could say they have to wait till they're ready, something like that. And then we had this discussion about God's role in the whole thing, that it seems like God appoints the king, or at least not does the appointing. God chooses the king, and there's a kind of partnership. The Jewish people appoint the king. In other words, they have to officially appoint the king, but they appoint somebody who God has chosen, and that is the role of the Navi. When it said before that a Navi, ideally a Navi is present, the Navi would be there to identify the person, but then it would be up to the people to actually anoint him or appoint him. That is true with all sorts of kings, but once a king is actually a king, the assumption is then that it goes to his children, unless God has chosen otherwise, as was the case with especially with kings that were not from the Davidic line. If you had a king that was not from the Davidic line, the understanding from the outset is that this is only temporary, which temporary means for a couple generations. So after that king, so let's say you had Yerovam, and let's imagine that Jeroboam, who is the first king of the 10 tribes, actually acted in a way that was completely in compliance with God's commands and the Torah. So it seems like his son after him would have been king, and his son after him. At some point, the kingdom would have returned to the Davidic line, but it could have been for several generations that it would have continued. When the son of a king takes over as the next king, that doesn't necessarily require input from the Navi or from God. That is the way things are supposed to work. And we saw this mentioned somewhere in the Rabbi Jachter thing, I think. We saw this mentioned that, I don't remember where, somewhere earlier when we were reading about it, maybe it was the Rambam, that when it comes to positions of authority, not just the king, as long as the son is God-fearing, he said God-fearing and capable, then he for sure should be the one to take over for the father. If he's just God-fearing, he's not capable, then a lot of times you should still appoint him. If he's not God-fearing, then you should not appoint him. So that worked even for positions of authority outside of the kingship. We also saw that that this issue of whether you should appoint a king or not is actually a discussion in the Gemara, and that Rabbi Yehuda had said that it's a mitzvah. So we were wondering, what does the Abarbanel do with that opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? So you could say that once you've decided to do it, it's a mitzvah to do it in a certain way, something like that. And then he brought up this issue just briefly about whether, let's say there is no Navi and the people elect somebody to be their leader. So what's the status of that person? And he suggested looking at these various places. Okay. And then it says here, just towards the end here, it is interesting to note that a king is appointed. The Vilna Gaon pointed out that a melech is appointed, but a moshel, here they translate as dictator, but it means a ruler, is self-appointed. When Yosef related his dreams to his brothers, they asked him, do you plan to be a melech? Do you plan to be a moshel? Ibn Ezra commented, the question is not redundant. The first rejected any suggestion that they would appoint him, and they also are rejecting the idea that he would rule by force. God is a melech to the Jews who accept his kingdom. However, he is only a moshel to non-Jews. In other words, he rules them, but they didn't elect him. We anticipate and pray every day that God's kingdom will be accepted by all mankind. Then God will truly be one and his name will be one. So that was that article. And now, I think this is the one from Rabbi Lichtenstein. Not Rabbi Lichtenstein the father, Rabbi Lichtenstein the son, Rabbi Moshe Lichtenstein. All right. When the establishment of the Jewish state, the nation of Israel, with the establishment of the Jewish state, the nation of Israel has been confronted by the challenge of establishing practical rules and regulations for many areas of halacha, which for thousands of years were totally theoretical. The need to transform entire areas of halacha from the realm of the ideal to the practical world has reinvigorated the halachic debate regarding these disciplines. As the practical realities involved in the new situation rise to the fore, requiring a re-examination and issuance of guidelines which can satisfy both the halachic and practical needs. One of these areas is the issue of government. Aside from scattered remarks in various sources, the only systematic exposition of the laws pertaining to Jewish government is the Rambam's Hilchos Melachim. So again, that's the Rambam in the codes. We read from the first chapter of the Rambam on the laws of kings and their wars. Though the Torah devoted an entire section to the law of kingdom, subsequent discussions in Chazal still leave many issues, some of which have attracted much attention in our times, unresolved. This series of shiurim, of classes, will attempt to deal with various issues relating to Jewish government as recognized by halacha, starting from the biblical sources and working our way to modern poskim. We will concern ourselves with the system as developed by Chazal, which means the sages, and with its application to our current day realities. At this point, it's only proper that we acknowledge our debt to an outstanding secondary source, Professor G. Blitzstein's Ekronot Mediniyim B'Mishnato Shel HaRambam, which provided much needed sources and organization in this uncharted field. So that article is about nationhood through the teachings of the Rambam. The starting point for our discussion must obviously be the section in the book of Devarim, which deals with the appointment of a king by the people of Israel. In a famous passage, the Torah states, "You shall appoint yourselves a king," after which it details the halachot regulating royal policy and behavior. The most fundamental question relating to these verses is whether the statement regarding the appointment of a king, Som Tasim Alecha Melech, you shall surely appoint a king over you, is it an imperative command, establishing the fact that there's a positive commandment to appoint a king? Or is the Torah only regulating the conduct of a potential ruler should the people of Israel appoint one of their own? The Gemara registers a machloket between the Tanoim on this issue. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi claim the appointment of the king as a positive command, imperative on the people of Israel upon the entry to Eretz Yisrael, while Rav Nehurai is of the opinion that the Torah doesn't require a monarchical system at all. We also saw there was Rav Nehemiah involved over there. And that all the laws relating to royal affairs are no more than the recognition and regulation of pre-existing state of affairs. Most Rishonim, medieval sages, accept the majority position that a monarchy is the desired form of government. So he is the one who's making this classification. He is saying that most medieval sages accept the majority position that a monarchy is the desired form of government, with the notable exception of the Abarbanel, Don Isaac Abarbanel, who forcefully argues against this position. See his commentary on that section in Devarim and his introduction to the book of Shmuel. In analyzing this machlokas, we must first undertake to understand the opinion of those who reject the monarchical system. Are they denying that the Torah has taken an interest in any form of government, or are they merely unaccepting of monarchy as the desired form of government? For actually, there are two separate issues which confront us here. Does the Torah have anything to say about forms of human government or not? Is the regulation and organization of society a concern of the Torah, or does it consider these to be a practical matter of human convenience, which divine wisdom doesn't concern itself with? So again, does the Torah have an opinion about what the best form of government is? Even if we accept the premise that the Torah interests itself with practical human affairs, it must still be decided which of the various forms of government the Torah chose and whether monarchy is indeed the desired system. Obviously, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, the Rambam, and Sefer HaChinuch, and all the commentators who are of the opinion that it's a mitzvah to appoint a king, answered both of these questions in the affirmative. Implied in their opinion are both the fact that the Torah involves itself in the regulation of human affairs, in other words, in the politics of human beings, and that it chose to endorse monarchy as the proper form of government. Rejection, though, of either of these two premises will result in opinion that the Torah does not mandate the appointment of a king. Therefore, Reb Roy's dissenting view that the Torah did not require the people of Israel to anoint a king can be understood as expressing total detachment from political affairs, or as a more limited position which argues that the Torah is unwilling to accept a specific form of monarchical government as being preferable to other alternatives. Though the sources don't provide much help in resolving this doubt, it would seem that the latter alternative should be adopted. So he's taking a position that the latter alternative should be adopted. The Torah constantly involves itself with human affairs and devotes much space to mitzvot whose purpose is to regulate various aspects of human society. For instance, the Torah tells us that we're not supposed to take interest from other people when you have loans. The Torah talks to us about giving tzedakah to the poor. These are not just goodly deeds; they are deeds that, in a certain sense, interfere in the economic lives of people. And you could see how, especially in modern times, some of these mitzvahs, the mitzvahs in these areas, would suggest a kind of role for politicians, and also create limitations for political direction, especially if you understand, like in Pirkei Avos, when it talks about desired kind of characters for people. So at one point it says, if a person says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, that is, they characterize it as midas Sodom. This is the character trait of Sodom. Now, however they got to it, that's making a judgment about a certain attitude. There's some people who suggest that this attitude, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, is like kind of underlying theme of capitalism, like of a not a like a those people who advocate for like a very strict extreme capitalism.
Rabbi,
yeah.
two questions. One would be, does when you said they characterize them as the sodomites, would it be the same for Laban's household too?
If his attitude was what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, strictly, in other words, that we should adhere to this strictly, which would mean giving things to other people would be wrong, and everybody should earn what is theirs. If you had an attitude like that, then if Lavan had that attitude, then it would be a sodomite attitude. The only thing is, he seems to demonstrate that he doesn't have that, because he invites the angels in and gives them shelter and food and things like that. So that would seem to suggest that he's following Abraham's code, which is a code of loving kindness and giving and sharing with other people. So I'm just trying to show you some examples of how it could become something that would spill into a political sphere if you apply some of these mitzvos and some of the attitudes about mitzvos as you see them interpreted or explained in the oral law. They would color how the political system plays out.
Rabbi,
yeah.
what are you reading from? Where is this taken from?
So this is an article. His name is Rabbi Moshe Lichtenstein. He is one of the main rabbinic figures in the yeshiva that's called Har Etzion. Sometimes it's called the Gush, and they are in the area of the Etzion block, and it's a yeshiva that became known for its high degree of scholarship, but also for our benefit. They strongly embraced the internet in a way that they made it sort of became important for them to provide material that would be available on the internet. So their stuff is just very available. They are scholars of a very high level, especially Rabbi Moshe Lichtenstein. His father was Varn Lichtenstein, who was one of the Rosh Hashivas there and was considered one of the great thinkers of the past generation. So, and again, we're looking for this not because it's the final word on something. Whenever I read these articles, it's just to find somebody who's thoughtfully putting the discussion out there. We're not necessarily going to end up with the final word on this subject, but just got an opportunity to see how it's discussed and characterized. Because our mitzvah originally was the Rambam. He said that he counted as one of the 613 mitzvahs to appoint a king, and we saw him discuss that, and then we went to the codes and saw the first chapter of his codes where he talked about it. And so we're just getting, because this is such an important subject and one that is not well understood, I just thought it would be important for us to see a treatment of some of the issues. We're not going to go through all his classes. We're just going to go through this one on this. And then this, I think, is going to be our final article on these subjects. Right. So again, he is characterizing most Rishonim, most medieval sages, and he's saying it's the majority position that a monarchy is the desired form of government. But then he wants to explore the other opinion first before he gets back to that. So the other opinion is we're not sure. Does the other opinion tell us that God doesn't really care what kind of government we do? They're all the same. Does he have some kind of preference for a type of government? Maybe God is leaving that entirely up to people, how you govern yourselves and the rules for how you govern yourselves and the principles under which you govern yourselves. I'm going to leave that up to you, and I'll let you work that out. I'm assuming that if we asked God about that, he would say that he's expecting us to work it out, informed by the values of the Torah, but he's not necessarily going to So if does he prefer a republic? Does he prefer a parliamentary system? Does he prefer democracy at all? He's sort of going to let us work that out. So that was an option. He doesn't. He said over here, though these sources don't provide much help in resolving this doubt, it would seem that the latter alternative should be adopted. The Torah constantly involves itself with human affairs and devotes much space to mitzvot whose purpose is to regulate various aspects of human society. Moreover, a considerable amount of the Torah itself revolves around the political situation current at the time of the prophets. To assume apathy towards a political system, which is the fundamental regulatory mechanism of human society, seems to run counter to the entire grain of Torah and mitzvot. Therefore, it would seem that all agree that the Torah requires good government. Again, what you could say is the Torah is not going to tell you what form of government to have, but it's going to expect that whatever form of government you have, those in government and their choices are informed by the Torah.
So I got new rabbi. It's amazing to me when you look at all the kings that happened after David and Solomon, how many were bad.
Right. Now, at the same time, you have to take into consideration that almost only their mistakes are being written. You're looking at a list of mistakes. Like, what if you looked at this is one of those things you have to. They're except for like Chizkiyahu and Yoshio, you're looking at a list of the mistakes, the failures. You're not getting an equal treatment of the things that they did right. So, for instance, let's say you wanted to see what kind of student somebody was, and you looked in the person's student records, and you find that they had detention, they had this, they had that, right? Oftentimes, those are the things that make it into the student record. It's not necessarily designed to create balance. And you would see all the times that this person turned in their homework on time, or all the times that they, got 100 on the test, those things. So you have to, when you're reading about this, and this is the same thing with the Jewish people in the desert, and this is the same thing when you're reading earlier stories, none of them claim to be giving you the full picture of what was going on. You're getting like chosen slices of what happened. And also, by the way, you're getting chosen slices from one perspective, Now, these are considered to be very important for governance. You could imagine that you'd spend more time on what went wrong than you would on what went right, because you don't want to repeat what went wrong. But at the same time, so when you do that, you can't think of it as a kind of characterization of who these people are. If you get 3 stories about somebody, and then you come to where we all tend to, but if I come to a decision about the character of Ruvain because I saw 3 stories in the Torah about Ruvain, and I saw, let's say, Yaakov's blessing, and so now I'm coming to a sense of the entire character of Reuben. There's just not enough material for that, so you have to remember that. But you are right that, and that has to do with this paragraph, that that at least it's being suggested here by Rabbi Lichtenstein, that a big part of the reason that these failures are being listed is because God does care about governance, and he does care about the system of governance, and therefore he wants us to see what didn't work or what went wrong or what. And by the way, like even nowadays, let's say somebody was writing about us who live in Chicago, or Sam, who at least sometime in Chicago, but let's say they're writing about us, and somebody chooses to castigate us because during the entire time we lived here, we did nothing. We personally did nothing or very little to relieve the suffering of people who are in poverty in Chicago or living with violence and all sorts of other just terrible circumstances. So you could imagine that there would be a prophet who would characterize our time very much in the way that they characterized King Ahab's time. King Ahab is considered one of the worst kings. That's what the prophet says. He's like one of the worst kings ever. But on what measure was he one of the worst kings ever? It happens to be that under King Ahab, there was tremendous prosperity. Under King Ahab, there was peace. Under King Ahab, and there was a lot of building and construction, right? So, but at the same time, under King Ahab, there was a regime of idolatry, and there was a lot of chasing after materialism and taking advantage of the poor and vulnerability. But if somebody would say that if somebody would apply that lens to us in Chicago, we could get the very same treatment. It wouldn't take like a big stretch to imagine that we could get a very similar treatment to what they got during the time of King Ahab, which is considered one of the worst regimes that ever was, because they were, because the measure was based on those things, and those things, if they were applied to us, may also get that kind of treatment.
Reminds me, Rabbi, reminds me of when you look into looking for let's say a physician, a new doctor, and you go through the list on the computer, of their scores, their points, how many 3.5 stars out of 5,
right?
And then they have, well, how many people gave them 3.5 out of 5? What was
right?
And
exactly.
They say one was one person did it, and then another one was like 25 or 30.
Right.
So
yes,
it's basically the situation is you don't have enough information based on the evaluation of all these people to say yes or no to this person. The only way you'll know is go yourself there and see how it goes.
Right. So this is a similar kind of thing. Obviously, we're supposed to study and take note of the classification of these people, how the prophets thought about them, and what the prophets were pointing at. At the same time, just to remember that we're getting just a few pieces of data. You can't make a big picture out of that. And for that, I always go back to that thing that Ramosha Shapiro, blessed memory, said to me when I asked him, did King David write all the psalms that are attributed to him? Did he write all those words? If I'm reading a psalm that starts off Mizmor LeDavid, did King David write all the words in that psalm? And so he said to me, so his response was, Ma ichpat lecha, what do you care? So I said, because if I know he wrote all these words, they become a way for me to connect to him. I'm reading his words so I can connect to him. So he goes, oh, you want to be the chavruta of David HaMelech. Zeh yefshar. You're trying to become David HaMelech's friend. You're going to connect to him. That's not possible. In other words, there's not enough there. That we don't have enough to do that, to reach the personhood. We have what they represent. We have what was decided would be the kind of historical story of King David. But his real personhood, the actual being, the person of King David, there's just not enough there for us to be able to make that kind of connection. Okie dokie. I look forward to continuing this discussion on Monday.
Make sure.
Yes, a Freilich Hanukkah.
Okay.
Rabbi, is King Herod considered the last king of his? I mean, who's our last king?
Usually when they talk about kings, they speak of the last kings of the first temple period. They usually speak of them as the last kings. That, although it is recognized that the Hashmonaim appointed kings, exactly where they stand as far as kingship in history goes, I don't know. Certainly, for instance, the Gemara says that Herod's, I think it's Herod's grandson, one of the Agrippas. So he was a king, and he noted that the Torah says you must appoint a king from one of your brethren, and that he technically is not one of the brethren, and he lamented it, but all the scholars around him said, no, you're our king, we accept you. And it was considered, the Gemara says it was a great failing that they said that they were wrong, that he wasn't an acceptable king. I don't know what they think about Herod. I don't think they think of Herod as a Jewish king. The last Jewish king might be one of Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander Janneus, or something like that. I don't know. And also they are that weird kingship. It was set up by the people. It didn't have the prophet. So exactly what the status of that kingship is. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Usually I don't hear I guess there is discussion of what kind of government the Torah is promoting, but they talk a lot about what kind of economic system it would promote. And if capitalism is related, to Stone, obviously that isn't the system.
Right, but I'm saying, but it would have to be some kind of strict capitalism that frowned upon taking care of the poor and things like that. If you had a combination and you called it capitalism, but you still allowed for taking care of the poor, so you had competition, but you still have safety nets.
Capitalism.
Compassionate.
I got it.
Rabbi, would it be libertarian?
Right.
No.
So I don't think so. I don't think so. It depends how far that goes.
Yeah.
I guess there's compassionate libertarianism also, I guess. All righty.
All right, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
Rabbi. Happy
Thank
Hanukkah,
you.
everyone.
Happy
Estelle, be
Freilich
well.
Hanukkah, Rabbi.
Freilich and Hanukkah, everybody.
Freilich Hanukkah.
Yes.